I never thought I'd find myself on the wrong side of a locked door. My own daughter blocking the entrance, her phone pressed to her chest as if it were a weapon. The air in the hallway was thick, the kind that makes every breath sting a little. I could hear my heart pounding louder than her voice when she finally said, "Mom, please, just go, before I have to call them." If you're new here, you're watching Women Unwritten, the place where our stories stop being polite and start being true. Subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The thing about betrayal is, it rarely comes from enemies. It's always the ones closest to you, the ones you've held as babies and soothed in the night, who know exactly where to press to hurt you the most. I remember thinking, as I stared at her trembling chin, and the way her eyes flashed from fear to anger and back again. How did we get here? How does a mother become a stranger in her own home? You're watching Women Unwritten. Tap like and subscribe so more voices get heard. But that morning started like any other. Or at least, it seemed that way. I woke up before dawn, made coffee in the silence, and scrolled through the news on my phone. The kitchen still smelled like lavender from the candle I'd left burning the night before. I tried to savor those early hours, the only time I could pretend my life was still mine. Before the world woke up, before the text messages and the phone calls and the demands started piling up. Julia, my daughter, had been home for 3 weeks by then. She said it was just until she got back on her feet. That's what she'd told me anyway. I'd opened my door, my fridge, my whole life to her, because that's what mothers do, isn't it? You never really stop waiting up, never stop worrying. She was 23, but to me, she was still the little girl with skinned knees and glitter in her hair. But that morning, there was something different in the way she moved around the kitchen. She was quieter, keeping her eyes on the floor, her words clipped and careful. I asked her if she wanted breakfast. She shook her head and muttered, "I'm meeting Lauren." I tried not to push. I'd learned, painfully, that pushing only ever made her pull away harder. After she left, I cleaned the kitchen, wiped the counters twice, and then sat at the table, staring at the old oak grain, wondering what I'd done wrong. That's a mother's curse, I suppose. The endless replay of every word, every choice, every moment you wish you could take back. I still remember the night her father left, the way Julia's small face pressed against the window, waiting for headlights that never appeared. I'd promised her I'd never leave, that we'd always have each other. But sometimes, love isn't enough. The first sign that something was truly wrong came around noon. I heard voices outside the window, low and urgent. Julia's car wasn't in the driveway, but there was a black SUV idling at the curb. 2 men in suits, talking into their sleeves. I watched them for a few seconds, my stomach tightening. Paranoia, I told myself. Just neighbors, or maybe insurance salesmen. But when one of them glanced up and caught my eye, I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to call Julia, straight to voicemail. I texted, "Call me, everything okay?" No response. It was just after 3 when she came back. She didn't look at me when she walked through the door, just headed straight for her room, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. I wanted to ask, to demand, but I bit my tongue. I'd been here before. Every confrontation, another brick in the wall between us. The afternoon dragged on, heavy with unsaid words. At 6, I knocked gently on her door. "Julia, dinner's ready." "I'm not hungry," she called back, her voice muffled. I left a plate outside her room anyway, the way I had when she was a teenager and angry at the world. The world, back then, had always seemed so simple. Problems were solved with cookies and hugs and late-night drives to the lake. Not anymore. Later that night, I sat in the living room, the TV playing some reality show I wasn't really watching. I heard Julia's door creak open. I listened to her footsteps in the hallway, the quiet rustle as she paused behind me. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd sit with me, that we'd talk. Instead, she said, her voice brittle. "I need to talk to you." I muted the TV. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, chin raised in that stubborn way she'd inherited from me. "What's going on, Julia?" I asked. She hesitated. Then, "Did you go through my things?" The question hit me like a slap. "No," I said. "Why would I?" She shook her head, eyes glistening. "Don't lie to me. Someone's been in my room." I wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance, but she flinched back. "Julia, I haven't touched anything, I promise." She pressed her lips together, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't feel safe here." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. I felt them cut through me, clean and deep. "Julia," I started, but she interrupted. "I'm going to stay with Lauren for a few days." I watched her pack a bag, hands shaking, eyes darting to me as if I might pounce. I wanted to scream, to beg her to see me, really see me, but all I could do was stand there, useless, as she left. The door closed behind her, and the silence that followed was deafening. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, Julia's untouched dinner plate in front of me, and stared at my phone. No messages, no calls. I scrolled through old photos, birthday cakes and Christmas mornings, Julia's gap-toothed grin, the two of us at the beach, arms wrapped around each other, sunburned and happy. When had I lost her? Was it the divorce? The move? Or had it been 1,000 tiny cuts, invisible until they bled me dry? The next morning, I decided to take a walk. The air was crisp, the sky a dull gray. As I rounded the corner, I saw the black SUV again, parked across from the park. This time, only one man sat inside, staring straight ahead. I felt a surge of fear, irrational and overwhelming. I turned and hurried home, heart racing. Inside, I locked the door and drew the curtains. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just coincidence. But all day, the sense of being watched clung to me like a shadow. By evening, Julia still hadn't called. I left her another voicemail, voice trembling. "Please, Julia, just let me know you're safe." At midnight, my phone rang. I scrambled to answer, breathless. "Julia?" But it wasn't her. It was a man's voice, unfamiliar, cold. "Mrs. Hayes, we need to talk, about your daughter." My blood ran cold. "Who is this? What do you want?" He paused, and I heard the sound of a lighter flicking, a slow drag of breath. "We know what you did." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my hands shaking. I tried to call the number back, but it was blocked. That was the moment I knew. Something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. Not just with Julia, not just with our family, but with the world I thought I understood. There were secrets in this house, in my life, that I'd buried so deep I'd almost forgotten them. But now, it seemed, they were clawing their way to the surface. And Julia, my beautiful, broken girl, was caught in the middle. The next morning, I made coffee I couldn't drink and stared at the sunrise through the slats of the blinds. I replayed the conversation with the stranger in my head, over and over. "We know what you did." What had I done? The past was a minefield, and I'd spent years tiptoeing around the worst of it. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug gone cold, when there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, official and precise. I opened it to find 2 police officers on the porch, their faces unreadable. "Mrs. Hayes?" the taller one asked. I nodded, every muscle in my body tensing. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about your daughter." That's when I realized the past never stays buried. It waits, patient and silent, for the moment you least expect. And when it comes for you, there's nowhere to hide. Women Unwritten, the night my daughter called the police on me. But she didn't know the secret I was hiding. Part 2, Docs. I stood in the doorway, my hand gripping the edge of the frame so tightly my knuckles burned. The officers waited, eyes darting from my face to the dark hallway behind me, scanning for threats or secrets. Maybe both. I tried to steady my voice. Is Julia all right? The shorter officer, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense haircut, stepped forward. Your daughter's safe, ma'am. She asked us to check in on you. That didn't make sense. Julia hadn't answered my calls. Why would she send the police? I forced myself to sound calm. Is she here? Can I speak to her? The officer shook her head. She's staying with a friend. She just wanted to be sure you were okay. Her gaze softened a little, as if she could see straight through me to the places I kept hidden. Is there anyone else in the house with you? I shook my head, feeling suddenly exposed. No, just me. They asked to come in, and I let them, watching their eyes flick over the photos on the wall, the worn rug, the mail piled on the table. The woman officer lingered on a picture of Julia as a child, smiling, her arms thrown around my neck. I wondered what she saw in that photo, a happy family, or the ghost of what used to be. They sat with me in the living room, their questions careful, almost gentle. Had I noticed anyone unusual around the house? Had there been any threats, any messages? I lied, or maybe just edited the truth, saying I hadn't seen anything, hadn't heard anything strange. I didn't mention the black SUV, or the chilling phone call, or the way Julia had looked at me last night, as if I were a stranger. When they left, the woman officer handed me her card. If you need anything, call me directly. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Sometimes, people keep secrets because they think it'll keep their families safe. But secrets have a way of coming out. She looked at me like she knew something. Like she'd seen it before, in other women, in other homes. I thanked her and watched them walk down the path, their heads bent together in quiet conversation. After they left, the house felt emptier than ever. I drifted through the rooms, touching the backs of chairs, straightening picture frames, searching for something I'd lost. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. It read, "We're watching. Don't talk to the police again." I stared at the message, my mind spinning. Was it the same man from the night before? Was Julia in danger? Or was I? I wanted to call the police right then, but fear clamped down on my throat. What if they didn't believe me? What if I made things worse? I deleted the message and tried to pretend it had never come. But pretending is a luxury you can't afford when your world is unraveling. That night, I lay awake, listening to every creak and groan of the house, every whisper of wind against the windows. I replayed Julia's words, the tremor in her voice. I don't feel safe here. I wondered if she meant the house or me. The next day, I drove to the pharmacy, mostly just to get out, to feel like a person again. On the way, I passed the park. The black SUV was gone, but as I stopped at the light, I saw Julia across the street. She stood with her friend Lauren, arms wrapped around her chest, head bowed. I pulled over, heart pounding, and got out. She saw me and stiffened, her hand tightening on Lauren's sleeve. "Julia?" I called. She hesitated, then walked over, Lauren trailing behind her like a shadow. "I just wanted to make sure you're all right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced at Lauren, then at me. "I'm fine. You shouldn't be here." My heart cracked a little at the coldness in her voice. "Can we talk? Please?" She looked down, picking at her thumbnail. "Not now, Mom." I wanted to reach out, to pull her close, but she stepped back. Lauren, always the braver one, spoke up. "Maybe you should give her some space." I swallowed the urge to snap. "I'm her mother." Julia's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. "I just need time, okay?" I nodded, defeated. "Okay, call me if you need anything." She turned away, and I watched her walk off, her shoulders hunched, Lauren's arm around her. I stood there for a long time, watching until they disappeared around the corner. On the drive home, I thought about the secrets that lived in our house, the ones I'd spent years trying to bury. My mother used to say that secrets were like mold. Leave them in the dark, and they grow. That night, as I washed dishes in the empty kitchen, I heard a noise at the back door. A scraping, a slow, deliberate rattle. I froze, soap suds dripping from my hands. The noise came again, a metallic clink, then silence. I crept to the door, hard in my throat, and peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just darkness and the overgrown hedge. I flicked the porch light on and off, trying to scare away whoever, or whatever, was out there. I checked the locks twice before I went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept seeing Julia's face, the hurt in her eyes, the fear. I replayed every argument, every slammed door, every night I'd stayed up waiting for her to come home. I wondered if she'd ever forgive me, if I could ever forgive myself. The next morning, my phone rang. It was the woman officer from yesterday. "Mrs. Hayes, can you come down to the station? There's been a development." My stomach dropped. "Is Julia?" "She's safe. Please come as soon as you can." I barely remember the drive. The world outside seemed unreal, washed out. At the station, they led me to a small room with beige walls and a buzzing overhead light. The officer slid a file across the table to me. "Your daughter reported someone following her," she said softly. "We're looking into it. But there's something you need to see." She opened the file and pulled out a photograph. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but there was no mistaking the face. It was me, standing outside Julia's apartment, looking up at her window. The timestamp was from 2 nights ago. I stared at it, confused. "I haven't been to her apartment in weeks." The officer frowned. "Julia says she saw you there, that you were watching her." I shook my head. "That's not possible." She studied me, her eyes searching. "Is there something you're not telling us?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to confess everything and nothing. But the truth was, there were things I couldn't say. Things that would destroy us both. I left the station in a daze, clutching the officer's card in my sweaty palm. The world spun around me, unreal and hostile. That night, another message appeared on my phone. "Stop talking to the police. Next time, it's your daughter who gets hurt." I stared at the words until the screen went dark. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. That was when I knew. I couldn't keep pretending. I had to protect Julia, even if it meant revealing the secrets I'd spent a lifetime hiding. I sat at the kitchen table, the darkness pressing in around me, and began to write a letter. I started with her name, shaky and uncertain. Julia. There are things you don't know. Things I've never told you. I only ever wanted to keep you safe. But as I wrote, the words tangled and blurred, memories rising up like ghosts. The night her father left. The things I'd done to survive. The choices that had brought us here. Halfway through, I stopped. I couldn't do it, not yet. But I knew, deep down, that the time was coming. Secrets never stay buried forever. And someone out there was determined to dig them up. Women Unwritten. The night my daughter called the police on me. But she didn't know the secret I was hiding. Part 3. Docs. I sat with the half-finished letter in my lap, my pen poised over the paper, unable to move forward or back. The words clung to my skin, heavy as wet wool. Julia. There are things you don't know. Things I've never told you. I only ever wanted to keep you safe. But safe from what? Safe from me? Or from the ghosts I'd carried for decades? The next day was a blur of nervous energy. I found myself scrubbing the kitchen until my hands were raw, reordering the pantry, dusting baseboards I hadn't looked at in years. Anything to keep from thinking about the threats, the photograph, the eyes that seemed to watch me from every shadow. My phone was silent. Julia didn't call. The woman officer, Detective Morgan, I remembered now, hadn't followed up. I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt abandoned. Around noon, I forced myself to eat. The fork trembled between my fingers. With every bite, I pictured Julia as a child, knees tucked beneath her at the breakfast table, swinging her legs and chattering about nothing and everything. She'd always been a bright spot, even after her father left, and the house fell silent, except for the drip of the faucet and the ghosts in the hallways. The knock at the door startled me so badly I nearly dropped my plate. I hesitated, glancing out the front window. No black SUV, no police cruiser, just a delivery truck idling at the curb. I opened the door a crack. A young man in a brown uniform smiled, holding out a plain white envelope. "For Mrs. Hayes," he said. I took it, heart pounding, and watched as he jogged back to his truck. The envelope was heavy, almost stiff. No return address. My name typed in bold block letters on the front. I closed the door, locked it, and sat on the bottom stair to open it. Inside was a single photograph. Julia, taken from a distance, head down, her face half hidden by a curtain of hair. On the back, someone had scrawled in thick black marker, "Keep quiet. We see everything." I pressed the photo to my chest and squeezed my eyes shut. I wanted to scream, to throw the envelope in the trash and run until my lungs burned. But I couldn't run. Julia was out there. And whatever this was, it was coming for both of us. I called Detective Morgan. The phone rang 6 times before she picked up. Her voice clipped. "Morgan." I tried to sound calm. I got another threat. This time, it was a photo of my daughter, dropped at my door. Silence crackled through the line. Then, "Do not destroy it. We'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up, my hands shaking, and hid the envelope under the cushion of the couch. I didn't want to look at it anymore. I paced the living room, counting the seconds, glancing at the clock every other breath. Detective Morgan and her partner arrived in plain clothes this time. She took the envelope, studying it closely, her mouth set in a grim line. "Did you recognize the courier?" I shook my head. "Just a kid. He seemed normal." She tucked the photo in a plastic bag. "We'll have it checked for prints, but don't get your hopes up. These people know what they're doing." Her partner, a quiet man named Daniels, looked at me. "Is there anything you're not telling us, Mrs. Hayes? Anything from your past that could explain this?" I hesitated, the words turning to sand in my mouth. I thought of Julia, of her trembling voice, of the things I'd done to protect her. I shook my head. "No, nothing." Morgan didn't press, but I saw the disappointment in her eyes. She handed me her card again. "Call if anything else happens, and if your daughter contacts you, let us know immediately." After they left, I sat on the couch, the imprint of the photo still cold against my chest. My mind drifted to the past, to a night long ago when I'd made a decision that changed everything. Julia was 6. Her father had been gone for almost a year. I was working late shifts at the hospital, barely sleeping, barely eating. There was a man who started coming around, Tommy. He said he was a friend of my ex-husband's, but I never quite believed him. He was always too interested, too smooth. He'd show up at the house with gifts for Julia, toys she never asked for. I told him to stop, but he'd just smile and say he was looking out for us. One night, I came home and found Julia sitting on the stairs, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, her face pale. "Tommy was here," she whispered. "He wanted to talk to you." Something in her voice made my skin crawl. I called the police, filed a report, but nothing ever came of it. Tommy disappeared after that. Or so I thought. In the years that followed, I tried to bury the memory. Julia never mentioned him again, and I convinced myself it was over. But now, with every threat, every shadow outside my window, I wondered if Tommy, or someone like him, had found us again. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and tried to call Julia. straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice barely steady. Please, Julia, call me. I love you. I'm worried about you. Hours passed. I stared at the window, watching the streetlights flicker. I almost missed the sound of my phone buzzing on the counter. It was Julia, her voice a whisper. Mom, are you alone? My heart leapt. Yes, honey. Where are you? She hesitated. I could hear traffic in the background, a siren wailing far away. I'm at Lauren's. I needed to talk to you. Relief and fear tangled in my chest. Are you safe? A pause. I think someone's following me, Mom. I saw a man outside Lauren's apartment last night. He was just standing there watching. The panic in her voice was unmistakable. I gripped the phone, fighting the urge to tell her everything, right then and there. But I swallowed it. You need to stay with Lauren. Don't go anywhere alone. I'll call the police. No! She cried. Don't! They won't help. Last time I talked to them, they acted like I was crazy. Her words cut me. I tried to keep my tone gentle. Julia, please, just stay put. I'll figure something out. We hung up, and I sat there, shaking, every muscle in my body tense as wire. I realized then that I wasn't just afraid for myself, I was terrified for Julia. The feeling was so strong, so primal, it nearly bowled me over. I'd do anything to keep her safe. Even if it meant digging up every painful memory, every secret I'd tried to bury. The next day, I called my sister, Anne. She lived 3 states away, but she'd always been the sensible one, the one I could count on when things got bad. She answered on the second ring. Hey, stranger. I couldn't keep the tremor out of my voice. Anne, I need help. She listened as I told her about the threats, the photos, Julia's fear. I left out Tommy's name. I wasn't ready to say it out loud. When I finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Anne said, You need to tell Julia the truth. Whatever it is, she deserves to know. I wanted to argue, to say that secrets protected her, that some things were better left unsaid. But I couldn't. Anne was right. Julia deserved the truth, no matter how much it hurt. That night, I pulled the letter out from its hiding place and stared at the words. I began again, this time not for me, but for Julia. Julia, I wrote, I've kept things from you. Things I thought would keep you safe. But I see now that secrets only make things worse. When you were little, a man named Tommy started coming around after your father left. I thought I got rid of him, but now I'm not so sure. My hand shook as I wrote, but I forced myself to keep going. I told her everything I could remember. About Tommy, about the nights I lay awake, listening for footsteps, about the police report that went nowhere. I told her about the threats, the photographs, the fear that had become my constant companion. I sealed the letter and put it in my purse. Tomorrow, I'd give it to her. Tomorrow, I'd tell her the truth. But as I climbed the stairs to bed, my phone buzzed again. Another message, just 3 words. Too late. Run. I stared at the screen, my heart thudding against my ribs. I realized then that telling the truth might not be enough to save us, but it was the only chance we had. Women Unwritten. The night my daughter called the police on me. But she didn't know the secret I was hiding. Part 4. Doc's sleep never came that night. Every time I closed my eyes, those words flashed in the darkness behind my eyelids. Too late. Run. I lay there, rigid beneath the blankets, listening for any sound that didn't belong. The house creaked and settled as it always did, but my mind twisted every sigh of the floorboards into footsteps, every gust of wind against the window into a warning. At 4 a.m, I gave up. I padded downstairs, careful not to turn on any lights. The kitchen felt alien, the familiar shapes warped into something menacing in the half-light. I sat at the table, clutching the letter I'd written for Julia, trying to decide what to do. Should I call the police again? Should I wake Julia and tell her to come home? even with the threats still echoing in my mind? The silence was so thick, I almost jumped when my phone vibrated on the table. A new text, from a number I didn't recognize. Check your mailbox. My hands shook as I crossed the front hallway and opened the door. The street was empty, blanketed in that blue-gray light before sunrise. I hurried to the mailbox, my breath fogging in the cold. Inside, there was a small cardboard box. No label, no writing, just brown tape wrapped tight. Back inside, I set the box on the table and stared at it for a full minute before I could bring myself to open it. My mind spun with possibilities. Something dangerous, something meant to terrify. I grabbed a butter knife and sliced the tape. Inside, nestled in a bed of shredded newspaper, was a single item. Julia's favorite childhood bracelet. The one with her name spelled out in colored beads, the one she'd lost years ago at summer camp. I lifted it out with trembling fingers. How did they have this? How long had they been watching us? Underneath the bracelet, I found a note. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. Remember what happened last time you went to the police? Keep quiet, or next time, it's Julia. My vision blurred. I felt the room tilt sideways. I pressed my hands to the table, fighting for breath. I wanted to scream, to shatter the silence with the force of my fear. But I knew that whoever sent this wanted exactly that, for me to panic, to crumble. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Not yet. I sat there for a long time, the bracelet warm in my palm. I tried to remember the last time Julia had worn it, the way she'd twirled it on her wrist during those endless childhood summers. I thought about all the times I'd told myself she was safe, because I'd kept the past locked away, because I'd watched the doors and the windows and never let my guard down. But none of it had been enough. At 7, I called Anne again. She answered on the first ring, her voice thick with sleep. I told her about the box, the bracelet, the note. I didn't try to hide my panic. She listened, then said quietly, "Pack a bag. Come here. I'll book you a flight. You and Julia. Don't wait." I wanted to argue, to say I couldn't just run, but the words stuck. I realized I had no plan, no idea how deep this went. I agreed, my voice barely a whisper. I texted Julia, "Call me as soon as you wake up. We need to talk. Please, it's urgent." The hours crawled by. I threw clothes into a suitcase, grabbed the letter, gathered all the important documents I could think of: birth certificates, social security cards, old family photos. The simple act of packing made everything feel more real, more dangerous. It was nearly noon before Julia called. Her voice was hoarse with worry. "Mom, what's going on?" "Are you alone?" I asked. She hesitated. "I'm at Lauren's. She's here." I lowered my voice. "Julia, I need you to come home right now. Don't talk to anyone on the way. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Please, honey, just trust me." She started to protest, but I cut her off. "Julia, I'm not asking. I'm begging. Just come home, now." She must have heard the fear in my voice, because she agreed without another word. I spent the next hour pacing the living room, looking out the windows every few seconds. Every passing car, every shadow made my heart leap into my throat. Finally, I saw Julia's old sedan pulling into the driveway. I ran outside and hugged her so tightly she gasped. "Mom, We have to go," I said. "Now." Inside, I locked the doors and pulled the curtains. I showed her the bracelet, the note, the box. She went pale, her hands flying to her mouth. I haven't seen that in years. How did they—" I shook my head. "I don't know, but we can't stay here." I handed her the letter. "Read this in the car. We're going to Aunt Anne's. She's getting us plane tickets. Don't ask questions. Just pack whatever you need and be quick." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes, and disappeared upstairs. While she packed, I called Anne back. We're coming. We'll leave for the airport in an hour. Good, Anne said. I'll text you the ticket info. Stay off your usual routes, and don't talk to anyone you don't trust. I hung up and checked the locks one last time. My heart hammered so hard I thought I might faint. Julia came down, her backpack slung over one shoulder, still clutching my letter. Her cheeks were streaked with tears. She looked at me, eyes wide and terrified. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? About Tommy, about the threats, about everything. I swallowed, unable to meet her gaze. I thought I was protecting you. I thought it was over. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. It's not over, is it? I shook my head. Not yet, but it will be, I promise. We loaded the car in silence, every sound amplified by adrenaline. The drive to the airport was a blur. I took side streets, doubling back twice just to be sure we weren't being followed. Julia kept glancing over her shoulder, her fingers twisting the bracelet like a rosary. At the airport, I parked in a crowded lot as far from the entrance as possible. We hurried inside, heads down, barely speaking. The line for security was endless. Every time someone looked at us for a second too long, my skin crawled. On the plane, Julia sat by the window, her face turned away. I watched the clouds roll by, feeling the knots in my stomach loosen just a little as the city fell away beneath us. When we landed, Anne was waiting at the curb. She hugged me hard, then turned to Julia and hugged her even harder. You're safe now, she whispered. You're with family. The next few days passed in a haze. Anne's house was small but warm, filled with the smell of coffee and cinnamon. She made up the guest room for Julia and insisted I sleep in her bed while she took the couch. Every night, we locked all the doors and checked the windows twice. Every morning, I woke before dawn and listened for footsteps, for the sound of an engine idling outside. Julia barely spoke to me. She spent most of her time in the guest room, headphones on, staring out the window. I wanted to go to her, to explain, but I didn't know where to begin. My head was full of apologies, none of them good enough. On the third day, Anne sat me down at the kitchen table. You need to talk to her, she said. You can't keep hiding. I nodded, tears prickling my eyes. I'm scared, Anne. I'm scared if I tell her everything, she'll hate me. Anne squeezed my hand. She's your daughter. She's scared too. But she deserves the truth. All of it. That afternoon, I found Julia on the porch, legs curled beneath her, the bracelet dangling from her fingers. I sat beside her, the silence stretching between us. She spoke first, her voice small. Why didn't you ever tell me? I stared at my hands. I thought if I kept it from you, I could keep you safe. I thought the past was behind us. I was wrong. She looked at me, her eyes searching. Who is Tommy? I took a deep breath and told her everything. About her father leaving, about Tommy's visits, about the night I found her on the stairs with her stuffed rabbit, about the police report that went nowhere. I told her about the fear, the sleepless nights, the desperate hope that if I just kept going, we'd be okay. When I finished, Julia was crying. She leaned into me, her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in what felt like years, I held my daughter as she wept. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. We sat there until the sun went down, until the shadows grew long and the porch light flickered on. For the first time since it all began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. But even as I held Julia, I knew we weren't safe yet. The threats had followed us this far. There was no guarantee they'd stop now. That night, after Julia finally fell asleep, I checked my phone. Another message, this one colder than the rest. You can't run forever. I stared at it, my resolve hardening. No more running, no more hiding. It was time to fight back. Women Unwritten, the night my daughter called the police on me. But she didn't know the secret I was hiding. Part 5. Docs. The moonlight filtered through Anne's lace curtains, painting wavering patterns on the hardwood floor, and I lay awake, the message echoing in my mind. You can't run forever. The threat was so blunt, almost bored, as if whoever sent it had all the time in the world. As if I were prey, already cornered. I rose before dawn, unable to stand the press of the covers or the tightness in my chest. Downstairs, the house was silent except for the humming refrigerator. I made coffee just to have something to do with my hands, watching the dark liquid swirl, steam fogging the window. I wanted to scream, or throw the mug against the wall, or run until my lungs gave out. Instead, I sat at the table and tried to think. Every option seemed impossible. Go to the police again? The threats made it clear that would only put Julia in more danger. Stay hidden at Anne's and hope whoever was after us lost interest? I'd already tried hiding, and it had only gotten us here. Frightened, isolated, powerless. Anne found me there, hunched over my untouched coffee. She sat across from me, her eyes tired but steady. "What are you going to do?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "I don't know. I can't let this go on, Anne. I don't even know who's doing this." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're not alone. Whatever you decide, we'll face it together." Later that morning, Julia came down, looking pale but steadier than before. She hesitated in the doorway, then crossed to the table and sat beside me. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. I managed a thin smile. Neither could I. We sat together in the quiet, the weight of everything unspoken pressing down on us. Finally, she broke the silence. "Did Dad know about any of this? About Tommy?" The question was a blade twisting in my chest. "No," I said quietly. "He left before it started, before everything changed." She nodded, eyes distant. "Do you think he'd help us? If he knew?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe the man I'd once loved, the man who'd held Julia as a baby and promised to protect her, would drop everything and come running if he knew we were in danger. But I remembered all the times he'd chosen something, or someone, else over us. "I don't know," I admitted. "But we can't count on him." Julia leaned forward, her hair falling over her face. "I keep thinking about the bracelet, about all those years I just forgot. Did Tommy ever hurt me, Mom?" My throat closed up. I shook my head, voice rough. "No, he scared you, but I never let him close enough to do more. I promise you." She nodded, but I saw the doubt flicker across her face, and I realized that no matter how much I wanted to protect her, I couldn't shield her from everything. She was old enough now to see that some monsters didn't live under the bed, but right outside your door. That afternoon, Anne drove Julia into town for groceries and a breath of normalcy. I stayed behind, pacing the empty house, replaying every conversation, every warning. My phone buzzed again, and my stomach dropped. Another text, but this one was different. It was a photograph of Anne's house, taken from the street, the front door framed dead center. Underneath, a single line. "You brought her here. Mistake." My knees buckled. I slid down the wall, clutching the phone. Whoever this was, they weren't just watching, they were close. Too close. I forced myself to breathe, to think. I opened the old box of documents I'd packed, searching for anything. Old letters, addresses, names that might connect the dots. And then I saw it. A faded envelope with Tommy's full name scrawled in my own handwriting from the night I'd filed the police report. I'd never looked at it again, never wanted to see that name. But now, desperation cracked me open. I grabbed my phone and searched his name online. Obituaries, mugshots, nothing recent. He'd been arrested twice in the years after he vanished from our lives. Drugs, assault, then silence. But one article caught my eye. Thomas Ellis released on parole. No current address. The date was only a year ago. I felt cold all over. He was out. He could be anywhere. When Anne and Julia returned, I tried to act normal, but Julia saw through me. She cornered me in the hallway, her voice sharp. "What happened while we were gone?" I showed her the photo, watched her face drain of color. "We have to do something," she whispered. "We can't just wait for him to show up." For the first time, I saw the fight in her. My fight, passed down like an heirloom. I nodded. "You're right. We need help, but not from the police. Not this time." Anne listened as I laid out my plan. We'd hire a private investigator. Someone who didn't answer to the department. Someone with no stake in the old case files. Someone who could find Tommy, find out if he was behind this, without putting Julia in more danger. Anne made a call to a friend she knew from her years as a legal secretary. By evening, we were sitting across from a woman named Teresa in a booth at a rundown diner, the kind where no one looks twice at strangers huddled over coffee. Teresa was brisk, no nonsense, all sharp edges and hidden kindness. She listened as I told her everything, sparing no detail, my voice trembling only a little as I recounted the threats and the photograph and Tommy's release. She nodded, jotting notes. "First thing, I'll check on Tommy, see if he's even in the state. Second, you girls stay put. Don't answer calls from numbers you don't recognize. Don't go anywhere alone. And if anyone shows up here, call me, not the cops." Her confidence steadied me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could take back some control. Back at Anne's, Julia hugged me, clinging tighter than she had since she was a child. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up." I stroked her hair, my throat thick with emotion. "I never could. You're my whole world, Julia." That night, I lay awake, listening to the house settle. Every creak made me jump, but I forced myself to breathe, to picture Teresa moving through the shadows on our behalf, hunting for answers. By morning, she'd already texted, "Call me, I have something." I rushed outside to take the call, nerves jangling. Teresa's voice was calm but urgent. "Tommy's last known location was 2 towns over. He's been working odd jobs, staying off the grid, but yesterday he made a withdrawal at an ATM near Anne's neighborhood. We have a visual. Security camera caught him. It's him." My stomach lurched. "What do we do?" "Stay inside. Don't let Julia out of your sight. I'll be there within the hour, and if you see anyone, call me immediately." I hung up, my hands shaking. I went inside and locked every door, every window. Julia and Anne watched me with wide eyes as I explained. We waited. Every minute felt like an hour. I checked the windows, the locks, the shadows outside. My mind spun with everything I should have done, every warning I should have heeded. When Teresa arrived, she brought a file, a grainy printout of Tommy's ATM photo, dated 2 days ago. Julia stared at it for a long time, her hands trembling. "That's him," she whispered. "He's the man I saw outside Lauren's." The ground seemed to fall away beneath me. All these years, and he'd never really left. Teresa was all business. "I'll stay nearby, keep eyes on the house. If he tries to get close, I'll know, and I'll handle it." We nodded, trusting her more than anyone in a uniform. For the first time, Julia didn't look at me with anger or fear. She looked at me like she finally understood that my silence hadn't been cowardice. It had been love, desperate and imperfect. Night fell, and we watched from behind drawn curtains as the streetlights flickered on. Teresa's car idled at the curb, a silent sentry. I held Julia close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against mine. I knew then that whatever happened next, we would face it together. And that, for the first time, felt like enough. Women Unwritten, the night my daughter called the police on me. But she didn't know the secret I was hiding. Part 6, Docs. We spent that night huddled together in Anne's living room, the three of us clustered on the sagging couch, listening for footsteps that never came. Teresa texted every hour, just a single word. Clear. A fragile lifeline stretched across the darkness. Julia drifted in and out of sleep, her head in my lap, her hand clutching mine so tightly, my fingers went numb. Anne kept the TV on low, the blue light flickering across her worried face. It was almost dawn when I finally let myself close my eyes. For a few blessed hours, I slipped under, dreamless and heavy. When I woke, Julia was gone from the couch. My heart stuttered. I shot up, panic clawing at my throat, and ran through the house until I found her on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun climb over the trees. She didn't turn when I slid open the door, just said softly, "Did you ever stop being afraid, Mom, after he left?" I joined her, pulling the blanket tighter around us both. I never stopped. I just learned how to live with it. I had to. For you. She leaned her head on my shoulder. For a moment, we were quiet, just listening to the birds and the soft hum of the waking world. "I keep thinking about that night you found me on the stairs," she said. "I remember being so scared, but I didn't understand why. You looked so strong, Mom, like nothing could hurt you." The truth caught in my throat. I wasn't strong, Julia. I was terrified, but I knew I had to pretend. I thought if I looked brave, maybe I could trick the world into leaving us alone. She reached for my hand. "You don't have to pretend with me anymore." We sat there until Anne appeared in the doorway, holding mugs of coffee, her eyes soft and red-rimmed. She handed one to Julia, ruffled her hair, and sat on my other side. "Teresa called," she said. "She wants to meet us at the diner. Says she has news." My heart leapt and fell in the same breath. The last time Teresa called us out of hiding, it had changed everything. I nodded. "Let's go." We kept our heads down on the drive into town. Every time a car slowed behind us, my chest tightened, but Anne kept a steady hand on the wheel. When we walked into the diner, Teresa was already there, her back to the wall, eyes on the door. She motioned us over and slid a folder across the table. "I have good news and bad news," she said, not bothering with small talk. Julia tensed beside me. "Start with the bad." Teresa nodded. "Tommy's definitely been in the area. Someone matching his description tried to rent a room at a motel just outside town. The owner got spooked, said he was acting strange, asking about the Hayes family, asking if anyone had seen a woman with a grown daughter. He paid in cash, left the next morning. We don't know where he is now." My stomach twisted. "And the good?" Teresa opened the folder to reveal a stack of old police reports, one with my handwriting scrawled across the bottom. "The old report you filed against Tommy? It wasn't as dead as you thought. Someone, maybe a friend in the department, maybe just a decent cop, flagged it after Tommy's parole. When he showed up in the system again, it tripped an alert. The local PD is looking for him. Quietly, discreetly." Relief flooded through me, but it was tainted with suspicion. "If the police are looking, why haven't they contacted us?" "Because they don't know where you are. You're listed as moved, no forwarding address. That's a good thing for now. It buys us time." Julia's hand crept into mine under the table. "What do we do next?" Teresa leaned in, her voice low. "He's looking for you, but you're not helpless. I'm going to stay on him. If he contacts you, if you see him, you call me, and I'll handle it. Meanwhile, I want you to think about what you want, long term. Do you want to keep running, or do you want to stand your ground?" The question hung between us, heavy as stone. I looked at Julia, at Anne, at the woman I used to be, and the one I'd become. I thought about all the years of fear, of shrinking myself to fit inside someone else's threat. I thought about the nights I'd lain awake, listening for footsteps, waiting for the past to come crashing through the door. Julia squeezed my hand. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she said. I looked Teresa in the eye. We stand our ground. Teresa smiled, sharp and satisfied. That's what I was hoping you'd say. I'll put the word out, make it known you're not running. Sometimes that's enough to scare off men like him. But I'll stay close, just in case. Back at Anne's, the air felt different, charged, but lighter. Julia even managed a shaky laugh as Anne fussed over her, making sandwiches and insisting we eat. It was almost like normal life, if you squinted. That afternoon, I sat with Julia on the porch again. She looked at me, vulnerability and strength mingling in her gaze. "Will you tell me about him?" she asked. "About what happened after Dad left?" So I told her. Everything. The loneliness. The way Tommy inserted himself into our lives, always hovering at the edges, always watching. The way he'd made me feel powerless, small. The night I called the police, the hours spent waiting for them to arrive, holding her in my lap as she slept. How I'd sworn to myself that I'd never let anyone make me feel that way again. Julia listened, silent, her eyes filling with tears. When I finished, she hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. "You saved me," she whispered. "Even if you didn't think you did." For the first time in years, I let myself believe it. The rest of the day passed quietly. Anne and Julia watched a movie while I paced the kitchen, waiting for the next shoe to drop. But nothing happened. No texts, no phone calls, no shadowy figures outside the window. As night fell, I checked the locks, then checked them again. I drifted through the house, unable to settle. I ended up in Anne's little office, rifling through old files, looking for something, anything, that might tell me what Tommy wanted. Why now, after all these years? What was he hoping to gain? That's when I found it. An old newspaper clipping, folded between the pages of Anne's high school yearbook. The headline was faded, but I could just make out the words, "Local woman testifies in assault case." And there, beneath the byline, my name. I remembered that day, the fear and the relief, the way my voice shook as I told the truth in front of strangers. I remembered the promise I made to myself when it was over. Never again. I realized then that Tommy wasn't just trying to scare us. He wanted to erase what I'd done. He wanted to make sure I never spoke out again. That night, I lay awake and made a decision. I would not be silenced. Not for him, not for anyone. When I woke, I called Teresa. "I want to go public," I told her. "I want people to know what he's doing. I want him to know I'm not afraid." Teresa hesitated, then said, "That's brave, but it's dangerous. Are you sure?" I was. For the first time in a long time, I was sure of something. "Let's do it," I said. She promised to make the arrangements. An interview, maybe. Something that would put my story out there, make it impossible for Tommy to hide in the shadows. When I hung up, I found Julia waiting in the doorway. She didn't say anything, just wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time in years, I felt whole. We were done running. Whatever happened next, we would face it, together, in the light. Women Unwritten, the night my daughter called the police on me. But she didn't know the secret I was hiding. Part 7. Docs. The days that followed felt strangely still, as if the world was holding its breath with us. I moved through Anne's house with a kind of nervous purpose, opening curtains wide each morning to let sunlight in, refusing to let fear drive us back into the shadows. But the tension never really left. Not with every phone ring, every car slowing on the street, every unexpected knock that made us all freeze mid-step. Teresa moved quickly. By that afternoon, she'd found a reporter she trusted, a woman named Shira, who covered local crime and didn't scare easily. Shira called me herself, her voice steady, calm, respectful. She said she could come to Anne's, meet us on our terms, and if we changed our minds at any moment, she'd walk away. I wanted to believe in her. I had to. Julia surprised me by insisting she sit in on the interview. I need to hear you say it out loud, Mom, she said. I need you to show me it's okay to not be afraid. I could see that she was trembling, but she wouldn't let go of my hand. The morning of the interview, I barely slept. I dressed in the only nice blouse I'd packed and brushed my hair until it shone. Anne made a pot of strong coffee, bustling around the kitchen, trying to be useful, but really just needing something to keep her hands busy. When Shira arrived, she was exactly as Teresa had described. Direct, warm, her notebook balanced on one knee, her phone ready to record, but only if I said so. We sat at the dining room table, sunlight streaming over the old wood. I took a breath and told her everything. Not just about Tommy and the threats, but the way fear had woven itself into my life for decades. The way I'd tried to shield Julia, tried to build a life out of caution and silence. I told her about the night I first called the police and how nothing had happened, how Tommy vanished, and I thought we were safe, until the messages and the shadows came back. Julia listened, squeezing my hand when my voice broke. I saw myself reflected in her eyes, not just the tired, frightened mother I'd become, but the woman who'd survived, who had protected her child with every scrap of strength she had. When I finished, Shira nodded, her own eyes shining. Your story could help a lot of women, she said softly. Are you sure you want to go public? I was. For once, I was certain. If it helps just one woman not feel alone, it's worth it. Shira promised to be careful. She'd change our names, blur the details, but make sure the heart of the story was true. Julia hugged me when Shira left, holding on for a long time. I'm proud of you, Mom, she whispered. I realized then that the fear hadn't just belonged to me. I'd handed it to her, without meaning to, and now we were both letting it go, bit by bit. That evening, Teresa stopped by, a rare smile creasing her face. You did a brave thing, she said. Word travels fast in a small town. If Tommy's here, he'll know you're not hiding anymore. She sat with us on the porch, her gaze always scanning the street, but for the first time, I felt like we were on the front foot. I asked her, Do you think he'll try to come here? Teresa hesitated, then shook her head. Men like him, they feed on fear. When you take that away, sometimes they crawl back under their rock. But if he does show his face, he won't get near you. I promise. Anne made us all tea, and we watched the sunset, the sky streaked pink and gold. Julia leaned against me, the familiar weight of her head on my shoulder comforting and new all at once. I found myself talking about the past, the good parts, the afternoons in the park, the birthdays and holidays I'd managed to make special, even when money was tight and nerves were tighter. We laughed, and I let myself remember that I was more than what had happened to us. I was more than my fear. But peace is fragile. 2 days later, the story ran online. Shira texted me a link, her message gentle. It's up. You don't have to look, but it's there if you want. I hesitated, then opened it, Julia at my side. The headline wasn't sensational, just honest. When hiding isn't safe, one mother's fight against the past. My words, Julia's memory, our pain and our hope, right there for anyone to see. The article spread faster than I expected. Women from town, women from church, even women I'd known years ago messaged me, some with stories of their own, some just to say, thank you, or, I'm here if you need anything. The outpouring felt like a balm, a reminder that we weren't alone. But the threats changed, too. That night, an email arrived in my inbox. No subject, no signature. Just one line. You think this makes you safe? Attached was another photo, this one chilling in its intimacy. Julia and I, walking together in Anne's backyard, snapped from beyond the fence. My heart seized, but I forced myself to breathe, to forward the email to Teresa, to not crumble. Teresa called immediately. He's escalating, she said. He wants you to break. Don't give him the satisfaction. She arranged for a patrol car to drive by Anne's every few hours, and made sure Julia and I always had our phones on us, always charged, always within reach. That night, as I lay awake, I realized I wasn't afraid in the same way anymore. Yes, I was frightened, and angry, and exhausted. But the shame was gone. I'd told the truth. People knew. I wasn't alone in the dark, carrying secrets that burned my hands. If something happened, someone would notice. Someone would care. The next morning, Anne handed me the phone, her face pale. "It's the police. They want to talk to you." My chest tightened, but I took the call. The officer's voice was calm, professional. "Mrs. Hayes, we've apprehended a man matching Tommy's description near the edge of town. He was acting suspicious, carrying binoculars and a camera. We'd like you and your daughter to come to the station and make an identification." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Julia squeezed my hand, steady and strong. "We'll go," I said. At the station, the world felt slow, muffled. They led us to a small room with a one-way mirror. On the other side, 3 men sat in a row. I recognized Tommy instantly, even after all these years. Older, grayer, thinner, but the same eyes, dead, flat, hungry for control. Julia flinched, gripping my arm. "That's him," I said, my voice clear and unwavering. "That's Tommy Ellis." Julia nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "That's the man who watched Lauren's building. That's him." The officer thanked us, promising to keep us updated. We left the station shaken, but not defeated. For the first time, I saw a future where we might not have to look over our shoulders forever. Back at Anne's, Teresa was waiting. She hugged Julia, squeezed my shoulder, and said, "You did it. You faced him. You won't have to do it alone anymore." The relief was so sharp, it felt almost like grief. Julia wept in my arms, and I let myself cry too. Tears for all the years we'd lost, for all the fear we'd carried, for the possibility of something better ahead. That night, as we sat together under Anne's porch light, I realized that even if Tommy disappeared from our lives forever, the scars would remain. But scars meant we'd survived. Scars meant we were still here. And for the first time, I was grateful for every single one. Women Unwritten, the night my daughter called the police on me. But she didn't know the secret I was hiding. Part 8. Doc's sleep came for me at last, heavy and dreamless, the kind you wake from with tears on your cheeks and no idea why. I found Julia in the kitchen the next morning, brewing coffee with the precision of someone desperate for normalcy. She looked up when I entered, her face still blotchy but lighter somehow. She handed me a mug, our hands brushing, and I realized she was the one comforting me now. We sat together in the quiet, the house humming with the muted energy of a world resuming its pace after a long storm. Anne patted in, her hair wild, and kissed the top of Julia's head before sitting across from us. She smiled, a real one, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw hope flickering behind her eyes. A patrol car rolled past the window, slow and deliberate. Anne waved, and the officer inside tipped his hat. The gesture made me want to cry and laugh at the same time. I'd spent so many years believing I was alone, that the world turned its back on women like me. Women who carried secrets. Women who made mistakes and paid for them in sleepless nights and strained smiles. Now, for the first time, I felt like maybe I wasn't invisible after all. Julia broke the silence. "What happens now, Mom, if he's really gone for good?" Her voice was so tentative, like she couldn't believe it could ever be over. I reached for her hand. "We keep going. We heal. We forgive ourselves and each other. We don't let him take another day from us." Anne wiped at her eyes with a napkin, clearing her throat. "And you stay as long as you need. Both of you." Julia smiled at her, then at me. "I want to go home. Not right away, but soon. I want to see if I can be brave there." I squeezed her fingers, pride and pain swelling together. "You already are." That afternoon, I took a walk around the block, the first time I'd left the house alone in weeks. The wind was brisk, and the sky impossibly blue. Neighbors raked leaves, kids rode bikes, and for a moment, I let myself exist in that world, anonymous, just another woman taking a walk. The sun felt good on my face, and I realized I could breathe, really breathe, without the weight of watching over my shoulder every second. When I came back, Anne was on the porch, a book in her lap, eyes closed to the sun. She looked up as I climbed the steps. "You did the right thing, you know. Going public. Facing him?" I sat beside her. "I don't feel brave. I just feel tired." She laughed softly. "Brave and tired aren't opposites. Sometimes they're the same thing." We sat there in easy silence, and I let myself believe, if only for a few minutes, that the worst was behind us. Inside, Julia was on the phone with Lauren, her voice soft but steady. She looked up and mouthed, "Thank you." I nodded, blinking back tears. I would never stop being her mother, never stop wanting to protect her. But I finally understood that loving her didn't mean I had to shield her from every pain. It meant standing beside her, even when the world got dark. The next morning, the police called with news. Tommy had confessed to the stalking, to the threats, to sending the packages and photos. He'd tried to claim it was a misunderstanding, a family matter gone wrong, but the evidence spoke for itself. They charged him with harassment, breaking parole, and a half-dozen other things. He wouldn't be getting out anytime soon. I hung up the phone, relief and exhaustion crashing over me in waves. Julia hugged me so fiercely I almost couldn't breathe. "It's over," she whispered. "We're really safe." For days, we lived in that bubble, cautious, grateful, almost giddy with the possibility of moving forward. The world outside Anne's house was still uncertain, but inside, we were rebuilding, brick by careful brick. Julia and I talked for hours, peeling back layers of old wounds, naming hurts I'd never dared speak aloud. I apologized, over and over, for what I'd hidden, for what I'd tried to fix alone. She forgave me, not all at once, but a little more each day. Anne encouraged us to make plans, to dream out loud. Julia started talking about going back to school, about moving in with Lauren, about traveling somewhere, anywhere, just because she could. I let myself imagine a future where I wasn't haunted, where every new beginning didn't feel like a risk. But healing isn't linear. One morning, I woke to find Julia crying in the kitchen, a pan of eggs burning on the stove. She looked so young, so lost, and all I could do was hold her while she sobbed. "I keep thinking he's going to come back," she said. "I keep hearing his voice, seeing his face." I stroked her hair, tears stinging my own eyes. "He can't hurt you anymore, Julia. But it's okay to be scared. It's okay to need time." That was the day I suggested therapy, for both of us. She agreed, surprising me, and Anne offered to drive us to the first session. The therapist was a gentle woman, patient and wise, who listened without judgment. She helped us untangle the knots of guilt and fear, reminded us that trauma leaves marks but doesn't define us. Slowly, I began to see Julia return to herself, not the child I'd tried to protect, but the woman she was always meant to be. She laughed more, argued more, made plans. Sometimes she even teased me, rolling her eyes when I fussed over her, but always hugging me before bed, just like when she was small. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars blink to life, Julia turned to me. "Do you think you'll ever stop being afraid, Mom?" I thought about it, really thought. "I don't know. Maybe not. But I think I can learn to live with it. I think I can choose what I do with the fear." She smiled, her face soft in the moonlight. "Me too." The next morning, a letter arrived from the victim's advocate at the courthouse. She wrote to let us know Tommy had accepted a plea deal. He'd be serving several years, with a restraining order in place. Julia read the letter, then handed it to me, her hand steady. "Let's go home," she said. Anne packed us sandwiches for the drive, pressing them into our hands with a tearful smile. "You know where I am? Anytime. You're never alone again." Driving back to our house, Julia asleep in the passenger seat, I watched the landscape change from Anne's rolling hills to the familiar streets of our old neighborhood. I felt the old fear stir, but it didn't swallow me whole. I let it pass through me, like a shadow on the road. Home was still there, smaller than I remembered, a little dustier, but ours. We stood in the doorway together, the sunlight pooling on the hardwood, the air heavy with possibility. Julia squeezed my hand, and I realized we weren't going back to the lives we had before. We were building something new, something stronger, and for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see what came next. Women Unwritten, the night my daughter called the police on me. But she didn't know the secret I was hiding. Part 9, Docs. Our house felt both familiar and foreign as we stepped inside, dust motes spinning in the sunlight, everything just as we'd left it, and yet not the same at all. I unlocked the windows, letting fresh air sweep through the rooms, and watched Julia trail her hand along the banister, pausing at the family photos that lined the hall. We didn't speak at first. It was enough just to be there, breathing in the space that had once felt so unsafe, now transformed by absence, by the promise that the worst was truly behind us. We spent the afternoon unpacking, laughter coming more easily than I'd expected. Julia found her old journals, pages filled with teenage drama and hope, and read them aloud in a voice thick with nostalgia and self-mockery. I sorted through a box of letters I'd never mailed, apologies and confessions I'd written over the years but never sent. We laughed until we cried, then cried until we laughed again. When the sun dipped low, I walked into the backyard, the grass overgrown and wild. The air was fragrant with honeysuckle. Julia followed, curling up beside me on the worn wooden bench. We sat for a long while, watching the shadows stretch across the fence. She turned to me, a question in her eyes. "Do you ever regret it, Mom? The choices you made to protect me?" I thought about the sleepless nights, the years spent looking over my shoulder, the heavy price of silence. I shook my head. "I regret not telling you the truth sooner. I regret letting fear make me small. But I would do it all again if it meant keeping you safe." She rested her head on my shoulder, her hair tickling my cheek. "I used to think you were invincible. Now I know you're just human, and I love you even more for it." The next morning, Julia opened all the curtains, letting sunlight flood every corner. I made pancakes, burning the first batch because I was out of practice, and she teased me until we were both breathless with laughter. There was a new ease between us, fragile, but real. We kept busy in those early days. Julia called Lauren, inviting her over for dinner. I weeded the garden, swept the porch, and for the first time in years, found myself singing along to the radio as I worked. I caught Julia dancing in the living room, her arms raised, her face lit with something I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. Joy, unshadowed and free. But healing isn't a straight line. There were nights when I'd wake in the dark, heart racing, convinced I'd heard footsteps outside, only to find the world still and safe. Julia had her moments too. I'd find her standing in the hallway, silent and tense, staring at the front door as if expecting a ghost. On those nights, we'd sit together in the kitchen, sipping tea, neither of us needing to say a word. One afternoon, the doorbell rang. My heart leapt into my throat, but when I opened the door, it was only Detective Morgan. She smiled, soft and reassuring. "Just checking in," she said. "Wanted you to know Tommy's transfer went through. He's not coming back." Relief swept through me, mingled with gratitude and something like awe. "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling. "For believing me, for helping us." She shook her head. "You did the hard part. You spoke up. You protected your daughter, and you protected yourself. That's real courage." After she left, Julia hugged me tight, her voice muffled in my shoulder. We're really free, aren't we? I let the truth sink in, every word a balm. We are. We really are. The rest of that week was a slow rediscovery. Julia and I sorted through closets, donated clothes we'd outgrown, physically, emotionally, both. We painted her bedroom a shade of blue she'd always wanted but never dared ask for. She covered the walls with new art, photos of her friends, mementos of who she was now, not just who she'd been before fear took over. I called Anne every night, her voice a steady comfort. She sent care packages, cookies, books, a crocheted blanket the color of the ocean. Each box a reminder that we had family, that we were connected to something bigger than our pain. One evening, Julia and I sat on the porch, mugs of tea warming our hands. She told me about her dreams, finishing school, maybe studying psychology to help other girls like her, girls who'd grown up with secrets and fear. I told her about my own dreams, the ones I'd tucked away for so long I'd nearly forgotten them. Maybe I'd take up painting again. Maybe I'd write down our story, not for the world, but for us, to remember how far we'd come. We talked until the stars came out, until the world felt big and small and safe again. The house behind us glowed with lamplight, a beacon against the dark. On the first Sunday back, we went to the farmer's market. I saw familiar faces, neighbors, old friends, even women who'd messaged after the article ran. Some hugged me, some just smiled, but in every look I felt the quiet acknowledgement. We see you. We know. You're not alone. Julia bought a bouquet of wildflowers and tucked them into a mason jar on the kitchen table. She pressed a note to the fridge. We are safe. We are home. I looked at her handwriting, bold and certain, and felt a tide of gratitude so fierce it brought me to my knees. That night, as we curled up on the couch, I realized I wasn't waiting for the next crisis anymore. I wasn't holding my breath. I was living, day by day, hour by hour, learning to trust the peace we'd fought so hard to claim. For the first time, I believed in tomorrow, not as something to fear, but as a gift. And I promised myself, and Julia, that we would never let anyone steal that from us again. Women Unwritten, the night my daughter called the police on me. But she didn't know the secret I was hiding. Part 10, Docs. Summer arrived quietly that year, sunlight slipping through our windows before the alarm, filling the house with a golden hush. I woke each morning to birdsong instead of panic, and some part of me marveled at the simple, ordinary beauty of it. I'd spent so many years fearing the next knock at the door, the next shadow on the street, that I'd forgotten what it was to savor a life unbroken by dread. Julia flourished in the warmth. She planted herbs in pots on the windowsill and let her hair grow long again, streaked gold by afternoons in the sun. She started classes at the community college, coming home with stories and plans, her laughter echoing through the kitchen. I watched her stretch her wings, her scars not erased, but woven into the strong, bright fabric of who she was becoming. There were still moments when the past flickered at the edges. I'd catch her pausing before locking the door, or see her freeze at the sudden ring of a phone. But each time, she shook it off a little quicker. We both did. Healing, I learned, is a collection of small, everyday choices. 1,000 times you decide to believe in safety, in hope, in the possibility of joy. One Saturday, we held a small gathering in our backyard. Just a few neighbors, Anne, Lauren, some friends from Julia's classes. The house filled with the sound of voices and music, the kind of noise that once would have set my teeth on edge, but now felt like a celebration. Anne brought a homemade pie, Lauren arrived with wildflowers, and Julia beamed as she moved among our guests, radiant and at ease. She even read a short essay she'd written for her psychology class, about surviving, about telling the truth, about finding light in dark places. There wasn't a dry eye in the yard. As dusk settled, I slipped away to the kitchen for a moment alone. I found myself tracing the rim of Julia's old bracelet, the colored beads warm from her wrist, now resting in a small bowl by the window. The weight of memory pressed against me, not as a burden, but as a reminder. We had come through. Julia appeared behind me, her arms winding around my waist, her chin on my shoulder. "Are you happy, Mom?" she asked quietly. I turned to face her. In her eyes, I saw all the years, grief, fear, stubborn hope, and the fragile, fierce love that had pulled us through. "I am," I whispered. "I really am. Are you?" She nodded, eyes shining. "I feel like myself again. Maybe for the first time." We stood there, holding each other, letting the sounds of laughter and music drift in from the yard. I realized then that our story wasn't just about what we'd survived, but about what we'd reclaimed. Our peace, our voices, our right to be whole. Later, as the last guests left and the house fell quiet, Julia and I sat on the porch, wrapped in Anne's ocean-colored blanket. We watched fireflies blink across the yard, the summer air thick with honeysuckle. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for a long time, we just breathed together, safe and unhurried. I thought about all the women who had written after Shira's article, all the women who had whispered "me too" into the dark. I wished I could hold each of them, tell them what I'd learned in the hardest, most beautiful way. You are not alone. The past does not get to write the ending. Your voice matters. You matter. As the sky faded to indigo and the world slowed around us, I felt the words rising in my chest. Not as confession or apology, but as a promise. I would never be silent again. I would never shrink myself to fit someone else's fear. I would live, fully and fiercely, for myself and for my daughter and for every woman who needed to know that survival is not just possible, but powerful. And in that soft, infinite moment, I finally understood. We were not unwritten. We were just beginning. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments.